Hello everyone, and so in this video we will implement the conversion. After we in video number 3 we were able to build the user interface and set up everything. It's now time to convert. At this time the conversion will be triggered by the user clicking on the button. This button is connected by an action to the convert module, and the convert module here will be implemented, and this is where we will get everything. So the first thing is that we want to convert. We need to collect the data that are important to that conversion process, and this data is number 1, the amount that the user entered, number 2, which unit the user want to convert from, which unit the user wants to convert to, and then we need to, based on that, these two selections, use an if-else construct to apply the appropriate conversion factor. So let's start doing this in a case where the user select to convert from feet to inch. To conversion factor from feet to inch is, if you have 1 feet, you multiply that by 12, it gives you 12 inch, and that's the conversion factor. Now for each type of units you need to figure out the conversion factor. In other words, if you really can't convert with your own hands in a calculator, you will not be able to implement this in a program. In addition, you want to also have some cases where you can test if everything is working well or not. So let's choose a test where the user entered 10 feet, and if the user entered 10 feet, we know that that will mean it's 120 inches. So this will be our test case. We enter 10 feet, select unit from to be feet, unit 2 to be inches, and then see if the result will be 120 or not. So let's start implementing that. So we'll be providing instructions on how to do this in the convert module. So step number 1, we need to get the amount that the user entered. And that amount, so we'll say that the user entered, we need this amount to be float. So we'll say float amount equal, and the user entered this amount in the text field. So we say text amount. I will say give us the text, and then we need that text to be float. So we're sending another message to the string that's coming from the text field and say give us the float value of that text, and then close that string like that. So what I did here, I used nested messages, a message inside a message. The first message is the one going to the text field saying give me your text. This is the same as the message we used in the project number 1 to retrieve the string. This gives me a string, but I know that that string will have a number. So I want to actually get this as a float type, which is a number type, because I'm going to use this number in a calculation, in a numeric calculation. Luckily, the string class, the NS string class, has another message called the float value, which give you the float value of the number that's in that string. So on the string that's coming out of the text amount, I'm sending the float value message. So this is the second message to give me, or to convert that string from the string type, that number from the string type to the float type. The second thing I wanted to do is to get which unit the user selected to convert from. So this will come in 2 steps. Number 1, the picker view can tell me which index the user selected. Then if I use this index and go to the units array, I can get the actual unit that the user selected. So I can start with an integer that says index of unit selected in the from, and then send the message to my picker view, which is unit from picker view, and say give me the index of the selected item. So this is not the one. So selected row in component. So this one give you the index of the selected row in a given component, and since we only have one component, the index of that component will be 0. So we'll say give it to me for the component 0. Now use that index to get the actual unit that the user selected. So I'm going to use take that and put it in memory as an NS string and say that this is the unit selected unit from, and use that index to send the message to the array and say give me the object at index, which is this index of selected unit from. So now I have the selected unit from. I need to do the same thing for unit 2, get which unit the user selected to convert to. I can do the same 2 steps, take the index first, or I can have a message inside a message. So I can retrieve that integer. So I send the first message, I send it to the unit 2, the unit 2 picker view, and say give me the selected row in the first component, and this will give me the index. Then that index I need to use it in this unit. Actually, I better write this differently. So I start with the units array and say give me the object at index, and now this object at index requires an integer value, which is this integer, which came from sending a message to the unit. So instead of sending the message to the unit, saving it to a file, I can input the whole message inside here, and I would say unit 2 picker view and say give me the selected row in component 0. So now this is another message inside a message, but this is the inside message is used as a parameter. Is used as a parameter to another message. Now whatever comes out of that is a string. I need to save it, and I will call it selected unit 2. This line is exactly the same as these 2 lines. Is there a difference between them? It's your preference. Some people like to be very explicit, and then you can go with the first approach in step 2, or some people like to be condensed, and then you can go with the second approach in step number 3. Both of them work, both of them will get the job done. Now we need to apply the conversion factor. So apply the conversion factor depending on which units were selected. Now I do know in my file that I have multiple units, so I can be one simple way is I can apply an if statement, and if you put an if, this will has to be an if else statement, which means that you provide a condition, and if it is true, you provide set of statements if that condition is true. If it is not true, then you provide another set of statements. So what is my condition here? The condition is comparing the unit from to feet. If the unit from is feet, which is the condition I want to apply to, if the unit from is feet, then go ahead and do that. So how do I make that comparison? I send the message to the unit from and say unit from compare yourself, selected unit from, selected unit from, and say compare yourself with and there are, as you can see, different types of comparison. Compare yourself, or say is equal. So there's also is equal to string. We used the compare before, so we'll use is equal to string here. If the selected unit from is equal to the string feet, if that is the case, meaning that I'm now looking at a very specific case that the unit from is feet. What should I do if it is feet? Well, that information by itself is not enough, because I want to know if the unit 2 is inches, because that's where the conversion factor that I have applies. So the first if statement filters the selection of the unit from. I need another set of if statements that filters the selection of the units 2. So I come here and add another set of if-else statements, and that set will require also a condition over here. So the condition in this time is that the unit 2 is equal to inches. So I send the message to the selected unit 2 and say, are you equal to string inch? And did I type it inch or inches? Inches. Okay. Are you equal to inches? If that is the case, then I want to apply the conversion factor and into a number and put that number in the label. Now, if I can put it in the label over here and say something like label result, and say set text, and make a string out of the multiplication of 12 to the amount. But this will mean that in each other case, I will have to repeat setting the label text, and that's not efficient. What I need to do is to define a variable, and maybe a float variable called the result, and I will say this variable equal to amount multiplied by 12. So now I have that result, and based on this conversion factor. And then else, if this is not an inch, if the selected unit 2 is not an inch, then I can add something else here and say that if it is mile, if it is kilometer, if it's and so on and so forth. Likewise, if the unit from is not feet, if it's meters or miles, then I can do something else. Then I come here, and that's where I set up the label. So I'll say label result, set text, and then I set the text using the result that I have in here. If I do define result this way, notice that result there are two parts here. The first one is where we create result in memory, which is the left part of your assignment, and the second one is where we put data in result. When you create result in memory, you're giving that memory location a scope. A scope meaning that you give it who has access to it, or how long it is live. The scope determines where you can use that variable. So if I come here and say I want to put results, or I will have to create a string for that. So I say ns a string result as a string, and then use we've done that before, a string with format, and say give me a string made out of a 0.2 float, for instance, and then put result in here. If I do something like this, I get an error. And what is the error? Undeclared identifier result. but I declared the result over here, like only 3 lines before. How come it is undefined? It is defined, but defined inside that scope, the scope of the if statement. So once the scope ends by reaching the end of the if statement that is highlighted here, result no longer available. So how can I use result inside the if statement and at the same time use it outside the if statement? I need to give it a bigger scope. So bigger scope meaning that I need to define it outside the if statement. So that left part saying float result need to go outside the if statement. So I come here and say 4.1 and say define if a decimal number variable to hold the result, the result or the conversion amount. So I say float result and maybe initialize it to 0. So that always displays 0. Once you do that, the error here disappears. So now inside the if statement, you do not declare the memory, you just assign amounts to it, and then outside you put that value over here, and then on the label you say give me result as a string and semicolon. So construct a result, a string to format the number and assign the number to the label. Now those if statements, that's where we put some statements here. I'm going to delete that for now and delete that for now. So the else statement is empty and the other else statement is also empty in this case. So let's see if we're able to successfully convert and apply our case. So run, and in this case I need to select feet and select inches and enter the amount, and we said we're going to use 10 and convert, and we're not going to see it because we did not dismiss the keyboard. So let's dismiss the keyboard with the hit of enter. So to dismiss the keyboard, go back to your project number 1. Since this class is a text field delegate, I need to create the text field should return, implement text field should return action to dismiss the keyboard. Or we can dismiss the keyboard in the button as well. So text field should return, the last one here. And then we say return, and then we say text field or text amount resign first respond. I can also dismiss the keyboard from the button, dismiss the keyboard after making the conversion. By sending to text amount, say resign first respond. So make the selection, put 10, convert 120. So our case is correct, that when you enter 10 and you're converting feet to inches, the result become 120. So what we did is we implemented the conversion of one unit to the other, and in the next video we'll add a couple of more units and we'll try to activate the events, different events to trigger the conversion. Now we have the button. Maybe when the user hits return, and instead of just dismissing the text field, will also dismissing the keyboard, will also implement conversion, and perhaps when the user makes selection, the conversion also take place. All right, thank you.